The small bathroom of Violet Martin's apartment was already warm from the steam of the shower she'd taken an hour ago, but she still shivered as she stared at the thin plastic stick in her hand. 2 lines. 2 impossibly pink, undeniable lines. Her heart was thudding so loud, she could hear it over the faint hum of the building's ancient radiator. It didn't matter how many times she blinked or glanced away and looked again. The result didn't change. She sank onto the tub's edge, her knees unsteady beneath her. The cracked tiles on the wall seemed to close in the room, growing smaller, the air heavier. Her breaths came uneven, and before she realized it, she was whispering aloud, as if saying the words might make them less terrifying. No, 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 no. She was 27, still chipping away at the last of her student loans, working 6 days a week at the small independent bookstore on 47th Street in Bronzeville. A job she loved, but one that barely covered rent and groceries. And now she was pregnant. Pregnant. And alone. The father, Caleb Harris, had been a summer chapter she thought she'd closed. 3 months of stolen afternoons, rooftop dinners under string lights, and those long walks along Lake Michigan, where they'd talked about everything but the future. Then he'd accepted a contract in Dubai and promised to call. Promised to visit. Promises that evaporated like mist. Violet's grip on the test tightened until her knuckles whitened. She had no one to tell. Not anyone who could understand the sharp edge of fear slicing through her. Her best friend Simone was the only person she might turn to. And she needed to tell someone before the weight crushed her from the inside out. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. She snapped a photo of the test before she could change her mind. Her vision blurring with the first sting of tears. She typed Simone's name into the messaging app, then the words that burned her throat even as she wrote them. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. Her thumb hovered over the send button for a moment. That felt endless. Then she pressed it and set the phone on the sink as if it were too hot to touch. She drew her knees up, leaning back against the cool porcelain of the tub, and let the tears come. She didn't notice the mistake. She didn't see that her tear-blurred eyes had skipped over Simone's name, so she tapped a different number. A number she didn't even recognize. 40 stories above the glittering sprawl of Chicago. James Walker sat in his office, staring out through a glass wall at Lake Michigan's wintry shimmer. The city was a mosaic beneath him, gray rooftops, ribbons of streetlights, the slow crawl of late afternoon traffic down Lake Shore Drive. James rarely took moments like this anymore. At 33, he'd built Walker Capital from nothing into one of the country's most respected venture firms. He'd been profiled in Forbes, lauded in Crane's Chicago Business, and photographed alongside people whose names carried weight at charity galas. On paper, it looked like perfection. But the papers never showed the truth behind the sharp suits and effortless smile was a man who'd spent the past 2 years burying himself in work to forget the taste of loss. His former fiancée, Emily, had walked away after their 3rd failed IVF round, tossing her engagement ring onto the kitchen counter with a flat, I need someone who can give me a family. James had told himself he didn't need love, didn't need connection. But some wounds refused to close, no matter how many 12-hour workdays you piled over them. His phone buzzed against the polished walnut of his desk. He glanced at it, expecting a message from his assistant about the next meeting. Instead, the screen showed a photo. A pregnancy test. Positive. Beneath it, a simple, aching line. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. James froze, his breath caught in his chest. He considered deleting it for a heartbeat. A wrong number, surely. Spam, maybe. But there was nothing spam-like in the rawness of those words. Nothing fake in the tremor of that message. Without entirely knowing why, he typed back. You don't know me, but I got your message. And if you let me know, I would like to help. I want to be there, even if it's to listen. He stared at it for a second, then hit send. Violet's phone chimed from the counter. She wiped at her eyes, reaching for it, with the hope that Simone's reply would be there, full of the warmth and reassurance she needed. But when she looked, it wasn't Simone. It was a stranger. The words on the screen made her blink twice, her stomach dropping. "You don't know me. I want to help, even if it's just to listen." A cold wave of mortification swept through her. She'd sent that to the wrong person. A stranger. She'd just handed her most vulnerable moment to someone who could be anyone. She typed quickly, cheeks burning. "I'm sorry, that wasn't meant for you. Please delete it." The reply came almost immediately. "Of course I understand, but my offer stands. Sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger." Violet stared at the message, torn between shutting the conversation down and replying. There was something in the words, a quiet steadiness that didn't feel like a scam or a trap. "Why would you want to help someone you don't even know?" she typed back. The 3 dots appeared, vanished, reappeared. "Because everyone deserves someone in their corner, and you could use that right now." She sat on the edge of her bed, the phone warm in her hand. Maybe it was the hormones. Perhaps it was the sheer weight of the loneliness she'd been carrying. But something cracked open. Her reply was small, almost cautious. "I don't even know who you are." "My name's James," came the answer. "And you are Violet," she typed. "Nice to meet you, Violet. How are you feeling right now?" Such a simple question. And yet, it unlocked something inside her. They talked for over an hour, the conversation slipping easily from her fear to the absurd things she'd craved in the past week: cold watermelon in the middle of February, to his gentle encouragement that she was stronger than she realized. By the time they stopped, her breathing had slowed. The air in the apartment felt less heavy. She was still pregnant, broke, alone, but maybe in some strange way, not entirely alone anymore. She set the phone down, unsure if she'd ever text him again. But deep inside, she knew she probably would. If you've ever stumbled into a conversation you didn't expect, one that shifted the ground beneath you in ways you didn't see coming, you'll understand why Violet's story is just beginning. And if you're curious to know how a single wrong number could change 2 lives forever, stay with us. Suppose you're feeling the pull of this journey already. In that case, I'd love for you to like this video so more people can find it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Maybe even tell us if you've ever had a wrong number moment that mattered, and follow the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of Violet and James's story. Because trust me, things are about to get much more complicated. The next morning, the February sun fought its way through the grimy window pane of Violet's apartment, spilling a weak pale light across her unmade bed. She sat cross-legged in its center knees, drawn-up phone in hand. She had told herself she wouldn't text him again. That last night's conversation had been a moment of vulnerability she'd regret if she stretched it further. But here she was, thumb hovering above his name, James, as though the device had a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. "Do you still mean what you said about listening?" Her message was brief, stripped of anything that might reveal just how much she'd been hoping he would answer. The reply came within minutes. "Absolutely." And just like that, the thread between them tightened. The hours between her bookstore shifts became moments she almost anticipated. On her lunch breaks, she would sit at the small table in the store's back room, the smell of paper and coffee mingling, tapping out confessions she had never spoken aloud. She told him about her mother's insistence on strength, how after her father had left when Violet was 7, the woman had worked 2 jobs without complaint, never showing her children the weight she carried. Violet admitted she wasn't sure she could be that strong. James never gave her platitudes. He asked questions instead, gentle ones that invited her to look inward. "What do you think being strong means? Is it possible you've already been doing it without realizing it?" When she described the flutter of panic that rose every time she thought about hospital bills, strollers, and the never-ending list of things a newborn needed, He didn't rush to offer solutions. He sent her a photo of the worn leather journal on his desk, its pages filled with notes and ideas from his early days of building Walker Capital. He wrote that I didn't know what I was doing half the time, but I kept moving forward. You will too. They kept their boundaries. She never gave her last name or address. He never asked. Safety was in that distance even as their words wove something intimate between them. On the 12th night of their conversations, she sat curled on her couch under a blanket, a chipped mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. I have my first doctor's appointment tomorrow, she told him. How are you feeling about it? Nervous? Afraid they'll find something wrong? Scared they'll judge me for being single and broke? Afraid of everything, I guess. A pause. Then, if you'd like, I could go with you. She stared at the screen, the offer seeming to thrum between her fingers. Meeting him, the man whose voice she'd only heard, whose presence was still imagined, felt reckless, dangerous even. And yet, you'd do that? Of course, no pressure. Just an offer. She thought of walking into that sterile white-walled office alone, filling out forms with trembling hands, answering questions with no one beside her. Okay, she typed before she could talk herself out of it. Yes, I'd like that. The following morning was brittle and cold, the wind that stole your breath when you stepped outside. Violet wrapped her scarf tighter. As she stood on the corner outside Mercy Hospital, her stomach knotted. She'd arrived too early, giving herself enough time to imagine every worst-case scenario. She checked her phone, and there were no new messages. And then she heard a voice, warm and low, saying her name. She turned and froze. James was taller than she'd expected, his shoulders broad beneath a charcoal wool coat, dark hair touched with the faintest curl where it met his collar. The city wind flushed his cheeks, but his eyes caught her gray blue, steady and searching, like the lake on a stormy day. It's good to meet you in person, he said, his smile easing some of the tightness in her chest. You too, she managed, feeling suddenly self-conscious. How are you feeling? Terrified, she admitted. His smile softened. That's understandable, but you're not alone anymore. I'm right here with you. Inside the waiting room, he sat beside her quietly, not crowding her space, but never letting the silence feel empty. When the nurse called her name, he looked over with a question in his eyes. Would you like me to come in with you for the talking part? Not the exam, she said. He nodded. Of course. In the consultation room, Dr. Mendoza glanced at James when Violet introduced him as a friend, but asked no further questions. The doctor confirmed the pregnancy was about 8 weeks along and began outlining what to expect over the coming months. Violet's mind, thick with nerves, scrambled to remember the details. James leaned forward. What about nutrition? Are there specific things she should eat or avoid? Dr. Mendoza smiled, launching into a list: prenatal vitamins, leafy greens, folic acid hydration. James took out a small black notebook from his coat and began writing. Violet watched a knot forming in her throat. No one had ever done something so quietly thoughtful for her. He waited in the lobby while she had her exam. When she emerged 45 minutes later, cheeks flushed and a small ultrasound printout in hand, he stood immediately. They let me hear the heartbeat, she said, her voice wobbling. She handed him the black and white image, and something in his expression softened into awe. That's amazing, Violet. Outside, the cold air felt sharper, but not unkind. They stood momentarily in that awkward space between goodbye and not wanting to leave. Have you eaten? He asked. She shook her head. I was too nervous this morning. There's a diner around the corner, best grilled cheese in the city. Care to join me? The diner was all warm lights and chrome, the scent of butter and coffee wrapping around them as they slid into a booth. Over soup and sandwiches, conversation came easier than she'd expected. She told him about the bookstore, her English literature degree, and her dream of owning a shop one day. "And you?" she asked finally. "I've been talking about myself this whole time." "I work in investments," he said. "Biotech mostly." She tilted her head. "That doesn't sound very easy." Sometimes he allowed his mouth curving slightly. "But I like working with companies trying to make a difference in healthcare." It felt like there was something he wasn't saying, but she didn't press. They were still almost strangers after all. When the check came, he pulled out the notebook again. "I copied the doctor's notes for you," he said, tearing out a neatly organized page divided into categories: nutrition symptoms to watch and important dates. "Thank you," she murmured, meaning it for far more than just the paper in her hand. Over the following days, their rhythm shifted. Texts became a constant short check-ins, shared links to recipes that eased nausea, snapshots of her reading nook, or the frost on his office window. On Saturday, he called. "I'm at the farmer's market in Pilsen," he said without preamble. "They have strawberries you wouldn't believe for this time of year. Want to meet me?" She laughed, surprised by her immediate yes. 20 minutes later, she spotted him by a fruit stand, sleeves rolled up, testing the give of a peach. "You testing ripeness?" she teased as she approached. His smile when he turned was quick and unguarded. "Violet, you came. How could I resist? I was promised incredible strawberries." They wandered the stalls together, and when they passed a booth with hand-stitched baby quilts, she found herself pausing before one in blue and yellow tiny stars stitched across its surface. "It's beautiful," she said, when he noticed her looking. "Do you want it?" She shook her head. "Not in the budget right now." Something flickered in his eyes, but he nodded and steered her toward the next booth. Later, seated on a park bench with a paper bag of strawberries between them, she asked quietly, "Why are you doing this? Helping me, spending time with me? You don't have to." He looked out across the park before answering. "When I got your text that day, something about it stayed with me. I can't explain it exactly, but maybe there was a reason it came to me instead of your friend." "So, fate?" she asked, lifting a brow. His laugh was soft. "I don't know about fate, but people come into our lives when we need them. And maybe you needed me." "And you?" she asked before she could stop herself. He hesitated, then said, "Maybe I did." The wind had softened with the turn of March, though Chicago still carried its edge. On Sunday morning, the city glistened after an overnight rain, the sidewalks slick with reflected light. Violet and Simone had arranged to meet for brunch at a little bistro in Logan Square, which prided itself on strong coffee and an unapologetically indulgent menu. Simone was already at a corner table when Violet arrived, tapping on her phone, hair twisted into a scarf the color of summer peaches. "You're glowing," Simone said, as Violet slid into the seat opposite her. "Either that's a perfect highlighter or—" She arched a knowing brow. Violet laughed, shaking her head. "Don't start." "Fine, fine. But I'm not imagining the difference. Who's making you smile like that?" Violet hesitated for only a heartbeat. "His name's James." "James," Simone repeated. "And how exactly did you meet this mystery man?" Violet recounted the wrong number story, the messages, the doctor's appointment, and the farmer's market. Simone listened without interrupting, though her eyes sharpened with interest when Violet described James's quiet attentiveness, his way of noticing details others would miss. "He sounds dangerously decent," Simone said finally. "Which means my protective best friend instincts are kicking in. When do I get to meet him?" The meeting happened sooner than Violet expected. James had texted her later that week, suggesting dinner, and Violet, perhaps emboldened by Simone's curiosity, asked if her friend could join them for coffee beforehand. They chose a sunny cafe near the Blue Line, all exposed brick and hanging plants. James was already there when Violet arrived, with Simone standing as they approached his coat draped over the back of his chair. Up close, His confidence naturally seemed to sharpen under Simone's assessing gaze. He greeted her warmly, shaking her hand. "So you're the one who answered the wrong number," Simone said, settling in. "That's me," James replied easily, his mouth curving into that small smile. Violet had learned to recognize a smile that held back more than it revealed. They spoke of the weather, the pastries in the display case, and nothing in particular. James's answers about his work were polite, but vague. "I work in investments, biotech mostly." He left it there, moving the focus back to Violet whenever possible. Simone didn't press in the moment, but Violet could see the questions forming behind her friend's eyes. After coffee, James and Violet headed downtown for their dinner reservation. The night unfolded, as it often did, with him conversation flowing, the quiet sense that she could lean into his presence without needing to perform. It wasn't until the following afternoon, when Simone dropped by the bookstore on her break, that the conversation turned. Simone began leaning across the counter. "Do you know what kind of watch James wears?" Violet blinked. "A silver one." Simone smirked. "That's not just a silver one. That's an Audemars Piguet. My ex was obsessed with them. They start at 30 grand and go way, way up." Violet stared, the words landing with a peculiar weight. "You're sure positive? And that coat, custom tailored. Shoes, Italian." "I'm not saying any of this is bad, but why hasn't he mentioned that kind of money?" Violet tried to laugh it off, but the sound caught in her throat. It may not have come up. Or maybe he's deliberately avoiding it, which begs the question why Simone's gaze softened. "I'm just saying, be careful. Secrets like that have a way of growing teeth." That night, Violet sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open after her shift. The screen's glow washed her face in pale light as she typed James Walker Chicago Biotech Investments into the search bar. She didn't expect much, maybe a LinkedIn page or a company profile. Instead, the results filled the page: interviews in business magazines, photographs from gala events, headlines naming him one of the Midwest's most influential venture capitalists. Her gaze snagged on a figure in one article's sidebar: net worth estimated at over $2 billion. $2 billion. She leaned back in her chair, the room spinning slightly. During all those dinners, he'd let her split the check the careful way he never offered money. Even when she mentioned her worries, was that consideration or concealment? And why conceal it at all? The following day, she texted him, "Can you meet me at Millennium Park around 3? The park was nearly empty in the crisp afternoon light, the curved mirror of Cloudgate reflecting a scattering of tourists. Violet waited near the fountain, her scarf pulled high against the wind. When James arrived, the familiar sight of him, coat collar turned up, stride purposeful, sent a conflicting rush through her, comfort and hurt woven together. "Hey," he greeted, but something in her expression made his smile fade. "What's wrong?" She didn't bother with a preamble. "Why didn't you tell me who you are?" His brows drew together. "What do you mean I looked you up, James? Walker Capital, Forbes lists. You're a billionaire and you never thought to mention it." He exhaled, looking out over the ice-rimmed edge of the fountain. "I was going to tell you. When after I'd told you every detail of my broke, complicated life." Her voice rose despite her effort to keep it steady. "Was this some charity project for you?" His gaze snapped back to hers, sharp. "No, not. Then what? What possible reason could you have for hiding something like that?" James's shoulders shifted, a subtle sign of tension beneath the fabric of his coat. "When I got your text that day, it was the first time in years someone had reached out to me without knowing my name or my bank account. People have wanted something from me in my adult life. Money connections, status. My last relationship. She left after we learned I couldn't have children. Said she needed someone who could give her a family. And maybe that was the truth. But I always suspected it was also because the fertility treatments were affecting the company's stock price. With you it was different. You didn't know who I was. You weren't impressed by my name or what I could buy. And the more I got to know you, the more I feared that telling you would change everything. Violet crossed her arms, the wind lifting a strand of hair across her cheek. So you lied by omission. I never lied. I just didn't tell you everything. She shook her head, turning away. That's still lying, James. And it makes me wonder what else you haven't told me. He stepped forward but kept a careful distance. Violet, I made a mistake. I should have told you sooner. But nothing else I've shared with you has been anything but the truth. I don't know if I can believe that, she said quietly, eyes fixed on the frozen fountain. What can I do to make this right? His voice carried a note she hadn't heard from him before, unguarded, almost raw. She looked at him, then really looked the man whose presence had become a constant in her days, who had walked beside her into doctors' offices and farmers' markets, who had listened without judgment. But there was a shadow now cast by the weight of what he'd kept from her. I don't know if you can, she said. I've been let down by too many people, James. I can't do it again. Not now. Her hand brushed her scarf lower, revealing the faint swell at her middle. I thought you were different. I thought you were someone I could trust. The words hung between them, heavy as the winter sky. She turned and walked away, her steps crisp on the pavement. James stood where she'd left him, watching until she disappeared into the blur of pedestrians, the wind tugging at the edges of his coat. For the first time in a long while, he had no strategy, no plan. Only the hollow knowledge that something rare had slipped from his grasp, and the quiet, unshakable resolve that he wasn't ready to let it go. A week had passed since Millennium Park. For Violet, the days bled together in muted colors. The bustle of the bookstore, the steady rhythm of sorting deliveries, recommending novels to customers, barely touched the ache beneath her skin. At night, she lay in bed, listening to the quiet, her phone dark on the nightstand. James hadn't called. He hadn't texted. She told herself it was for the best. The space would help her see clearly, help her remember who she was before him, a woman who could handle her life even when it bent under its weight. But clarity didn't come. Instead, there was a hollow space where his voice used to be, and she missed it. She missed how his messages had steadied her mornings, the warmth of his tone when he called her name, the small, steady certainty of his presence. On Thursday evening, Simone stopped by with takeout. The scent of fried chicken and warm biscuits filled the apartment, but Violet only picked at her plate. Okay, Simone said finally, pushing aside her food. Tell me what's going on. And don't say nothing. Violet sighed, twisting her fork in the mashed potatoes. We're not talking. Because of the money thing. Because he hid it, Violet corrected softly. Because I told him almost everything about me, and he didn't think I deserved the truth. Simone leaned back, studying her. Did he lie about anything else? No, Violet admitted. But it was a significant omission. It is, Simone agreed. But from what you told me, it doesn't sound like he was trying to manipulate you. Maybe he was trying to protect something. Or himself. That doesn't make it okay. No, it doesn't, Simone said gently. But V, people protect themselves in messy ways. You've done it. I've done it. Maybe it's worth asking if this is something you can't forgive or you're still hurt about. Violet didn't answer. That night, she sat on her bed with the lights low and her phone in her hand. Pride told her to stay quiet. But something more profound, something that felt dangerously like longing, whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth salvaging. Her fingers moved before she could stop them. Let's talk. The reply came quickly. Name the time and place. I'll be there. The next morning, she chose a small cafe in Lincoln Park. The air was fragrant with fresh espresso and the faint sweetness of pastry's soft jazz playing low in the background. James was already there when she arrived, sitting in the corner with 2 mugs on the table. He stood when he saw her, his expression caught between hope and uncertainty. He said, "I got you herbal tea," as she sat the ginger you like. "Thank you." Her voice was quiet but not cold. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked tired. There were faint shadows under his eyes. His usually crisp shirt faintly creased, as though he'd been carrying something heavier than his usual load. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said finally. "I've been going crazy this past week." "Me too," she admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "I've been thinking a lot." "So have I." James leaned forward slightly. "Violet, I want to apologize. You were right. I should have been honest from the start. I was afraid of what his eyes met hers, afraid that you'd see me differently if you knew who I was, what I had. You'd stop seeing me and only see what I could give you." Her chest tightened. "That's not fair. I never asked you for anything." "I know. That's precisely why He broke off, exhaled. "After Emily left, I shut down. I told myself I didn't need a connection. And then I got your text. For the first time in years, someone needed me, just me. Not my influence, not my money. And I was terrified to lose that before I knew if it could last." Violet studied him, searching for the insincerity she feared. But all she saw was a kind of raw honesty stripped of the polish he usually wore like armor. "So you thought..." "What?" "That you'd never tell me." "No," he said quickly. "I was waiting for the right time. I wanted you to know me first, before you knew the rest." She considered that, her hands tightening around her cup. "I can understand why you did it. But it still hurt to find out that way, to realize there was this huge part of your life you were keeping from me." "I know," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry for that." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't the same as the one that had stretched over the past week. This one felt like a pause, a held breath waiting. Finally she spoke. "I need to know something. Why me? With all the people you could have in your life. Why me?" His expression softened. "Because you're real, Violet. You care about things that matter. You don't look at me and see leverage or opportunity. You look at me and see me. And from the moment we met, I could breathe around you. I could just be myself." The words settled into her like warm water, on cold skin, seeping past the bruised edges of her pride. "If we were to try again," she said carefully, "I'd need complete honesty. No more hiding things, no matter how uncomfortable." He said without hesitation, total transparency. "And I don't want your money," she continued. "I'm not with you for what you can give me. I must raise this baby and build my life on my terms." "I respect that," he said. "But being there for someone doesn't always mean financially. It means showing up, listening, and supporting their dreams. I want to do that for you if you let me know." Violet felt the walls around her heart shift, not falling completely, but moving enough to let the light in. "I've missed you," she said softly. His hand moved halfway across the table, pausing as though giving her a choice. She bridged the distance, letting her fingers touch his. "I've missed you too," he murmured. The connection was small, almost fragile, but it was real. In the days that followed, their conversations resumed without the unspoken shadows that had lingered. James was forthcoming in ways he hadn't been about his childhood as the son of a meticulous doctor and a fiercely ambitious mother, about the long, uncertain years building Walker Capital, about the quiet grief of knowing he'd never have a biological child. And Violet in turn let him see more of her, the fractured pieces of her parents' divorce, the way she'd promised herself as a teenager that she would never need to be rescued by anyone. There was still caution in her, the instinct to guard herself against disappointment, but the rhythm between them began to feel steady again. One evening, as they walked along the lakefront, the city lights flickering against the dark water, James said, "I know I have much to prove. I want to prove it." She glanced at him. "You're off to a decent start." "Decent?" he echoed with mock offense. She smiled faintly, the wind catching her scarf and pulling it gently behind her. "Don't push your luck." He didn't nod that night, but she saw the promise in his expression and knew deep down that the story between them wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The week after their lakefront walk, James texted Violet with an unusual request. "Can you set aside Saturday afternoon? I want to show you something." When she asked what, he only replied, "It's a surprise. Dress warm." Curiosity simmered in her through the following days. She tried to guess a restaurant, an exhibit, some elaborate apology wrapped in velvet and good intentions. By Saturday morning, she'd convinced herself it was nothing worth getting worked up about. And yet, she still fussed with her scarf in the mirror before he arrived. The drive took them north, the skyline shrinking behind them until the city softened into quiet neighborhoods. James said, little one hand steady on the wheel, his profile outlined against the pale winter sun. The snow on the lawns was thin now, retreating into patches that glistened under bare-limbed trees. Finally, he turned down a street in Evanston, lined with tidy houses, each with a small story written in shutters and porches. He slowed in front of a two-story craftsman, painted a soft, weathered blue. White trim framed the windows, and a wide front porch stretched across the front like an open smile. James parked and turned to her. "See?" They walked up the path, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke from somewhere down the block. "Whose house is this?" Violet asked, her brow furrowing. Instead of answering, he unlocked the front door and held it open for her. "Why don't you look around first?" Sunlight poured through generous windows, pooling on the polished hardwood floors. The living room opened into a kitchen with gleaming countertops and new appliances. Down a short hall were two bedrooms, one with pale yellow walls and white built-in shelves lined on one side like they were waiting for stories to be placed upon them. In the corner of that room sat a piece of furniture, a wooden rocking chair, its finish worn smooth with age. Violet's hand trailed along the curve of its armrest. "This room feels..." She paused, then looked at him. "James, what is this place?" He stood in the doorway, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. "It's a house," he said almost lightly. "Then after a moment I bought it." Her eyes widened. For you, and the baby." She blinked, the words settling slowly, heavily. "James." Before she could finish, he stepped closer. "Before you say anything, I know you want to do things independently. I respect that. This isn't me trying to take over. But your apartment is a fourth-floor walk-up with no elevator. In a few months, that will be hard, especially with a newborn. This place is one level in a safe neighborhood near good schools. And," he hesitated, "there's a bookstore for sale just down the street. I thought you might like to know." Her heart skipped, then picked up again with a steady, unsteady beat. A bookstore, Corner Books. The owner's retiring. It's been here 30 years. People in the neighborhood love it. She turned away, walking to the window and looking out at the street, at the tidy lawns, the children riding bikes in coats too big for them. The quiet sense of permanence. "It's a lot," she said finally. "More than I can accept." He said quickly that you don't have to accept it as a gift. We could work out a rental agreement. Or rent to own. Whatever makes you comfortable. I want you and the baby to be safe. And happy. She looked around the room again, her gaze lingering on the rocking chair. "Why the chair?" James's expression shifted, something more vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "It was my mother's. She used to rock me to sleep in it as a baby. After she died, I kept it, even though I didn't think I'd have a use for it again. The weight of the gesture sank into her. This wasn't just about shelter. This was about trust, about letting her into corners of his life he'd kept locked. They walked back through the house in silence, the air between them filled with unspoken thoughts. James stopped when they reached the porch, his hands resting lightly on the railing. "I know this is a lot," he said. "I know we're still figuring things out. But I need you to hear something whether or not you say anything back." She turned toward him, her breath clouding in the cool air. "I love you, Violet," he said. "I've loved you almost from the beginning, and it scares the hell out of me." Her pulse fluttered in her throat. "Why?" "Because I've built my life around control, around keeping things steady and contained. But you—" His voice caught, and he smiled faintly, almost ruefully. "You came into my life without warning. Now I can't imagine it without you." Violet felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but from the sudden startling truth of it, that she had been waiting in some quiet way to hear those words. "And yet, it terrifies me," she admitted, her voice low. "I've never had anything this good, and I'm scared of losing you." "You won't lose me," James said, the certainty in his tone, leaving no space for doubt. "Not unless you want to." The drive back to the city was quiet, but not tense. She stared out the window, the image of the blue house looping in her mind, the sunlight on the floors, the shelves waiting for books, the rocking chair. When he pulled up outside her apartment, she turned to him. "I'll think about it, about the house. Take all the time you need, no pressure." But as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she knew the decision wasn't just about a house. It was about whether she was ready to let him be part of the life she was building, not just as a guest, but as someone who belonged there. 2 days later, she found herself on that porch, the keys cool in her hand. The neighborhood was quiet, the air carrying the faint scent of baking from somewhere nearby. Inside, the yellow room seemed even warmer in the afternoon light. She sat in the rocking chair, the wood creaking softly beneath her, and imagined holding her child here, the steady rhythm of the chair carrying them both into calm. For the first time in months, the future didn't look like something she had to face alone. Outside, James waited on the porch, hands shoved in his coat pockets. When she stepped out, he straightened, searching her face. "I'll take it," she said, and his smile broke like sunlight through clouds. Not the bookstore, not yet, but the house, the space, the shared foundation they could build on. And maybe she thought the beginning of something even bigger. The first week in the blue house felt like breathing after holding her lungs tight for years. Violet moved slowly through the rooms each morning, letting herself learn the sounds, the old heating system's sigh, the porch steps' soft creak, and the whisper of branches brushing against the windows at night. She unpacked little by little, setting a vase of fresh tulips on the kitchen counter, stacking her books in neat, familiar towers until she could bring in shelves. James visited often, but never intruded. He helped carry boxes, replaced a loose hinge on a cabinet, and brought over soup the first night she sneezed. Sometimes they cooked together, his sleeves rolled up as he chopped vegetables, while she stirred at the stove, the quiet between them laced with something steady and new. It wasn't perfect. She still guarded pieces of herself. But the distance was shrinking, and she could feel it in the way her hand brushed his without hesitation, and how she caught herself smiling when she saw his car in the driveway. One Wednesday afternoon, the doorbell rang. Violet, barefoot and still smelling faintly of the cinnamon bread she'd pulled from the oven, opened the door without thinking. A man stood there, maybe mid-30s tall, with sharp features softened only by a shadow of stubble. His coat looked expensive, but worn, as if it had seen too many long days. His eyes, dark, restless, swept over her face with recognition, though she couldn't place him. Violet Martin. His voice was even, but there was something taut underneath. Yes, I'm Caleb Walker, James's brother. For a moment she just stared. James had never mentioned a brother. Caleb glanced past her shoulder, checking whether anyone else was home. Can I come in? Every instinct told her to be cautious, but something in his manner, brisk but not threatening, made her step back. The warmth of the house seemed to pause as he stepped inside. He scanned the living room, his gaze catching briefly on the unpacked boxes and the stack of prenatal vitamins by the counter. I didn't know James had a brother, she said, finally keeping her tone polite. That's because we don't exactly keep in touch, Caleb replied. He didn't sit. He just stood there, unsure if he was welcome. I'm guessing he didn't tell you about me because it's easier for him to pretend I don't exist, Caleb continued. But you should know who you're dealing with before you get in too deep. Something inside her bristled. You should speak to him if you came here to talk about James. I tried, Caleb said. He doesn't listen. She crossed her arms, the cinnamon-sweet air of the kitchen, feeling strangely heavy now. And why do you think I would? He studied her for a moment. Because you're not just some passing interest to him. He doesn't bring people into his life like this. And I figured if someone gets hurt, they may deserve the whole picture. She felt her pulse pick up. What picture? Caleb hesitated, then said, James and I grew up with a father who thought control was the same as love. We learned different lessons from that. I walked away from the family business. He stayed. And staying comes with its compromises. Violet frowned. That's still vague. Caleb's gaze sharpened, but there was something almost regretful in it. Let's say James isn't as untouchable as he likes to seem. He's made enemies people who wouldn't hesitate to use someone close to them as leverage. The words landed like a cold draft under the door. She opened her mouth to respond, but the low growl of an engine outside pulled her attention to the window. A sleek black car had pulled into the driveway. James stepped out, his shoulders, squared his jaw tight. Within seconds, the door opened, and he was inside, his eyes locking on his brother. What the hell are you doing here, Caleb? Caleb gave a short, humorless smile. Catching up. This isn't your business. She's carrying your child, James. That makes it my business if you can't keep your life clean. Violet felt the tension between them like static in the air. James's eyes softened when they flicked to her, but his voice stayed hard when he addressed Caleb. You've had years to be part of my life, and spent them doing the opposite. Please don't come here now, pretending you're protecting her. Caleb's gaze shifted to Violet again. Don't assume you know everything. With that, he stepped past James and out the door, the sound of the car starting to break the strained silence he had left behind. James closed the door slowly, his hand still on the knob for a long moment before he turned to her. I'm sorry he came here. He shouldn't have. Violet searched his face. Why didn't you tell me you had a brother? His jaw flexed. Because we're not close. Because most of the time talking about him leads to exactly this. Him trying to make me look like someone I'm not. And, is he wrong? She asked softly. James met her gaze without flinching. I've made business decisions that weren't easy, but I don't live in a world where I hurt people to get ahead. I'm not that man. She wanted to believe him. Part of her did. But Caleb's words had carved out a small space in her mind that reassurance alone would not fill. Why would he say you have enemies? She asked. James exhaled slowly. Because in business at my level, competition gets ugly. Sometimes personal. That's why I keep my private life private. Why was I careful with you in the beginning? I didn't want to put you in a position where someone could use you to hurt me. Violet thought of the blue house of the rocking chair, of the way he had been letting her in piece by piece. "Is there something I need to be worried about?" she asked. His eyes softened. "No one is coming for you. Not while I'm here." She didn't press further. Not tonight. But as she lay in bed later, the shadows on the ceiling seemed longer, and the house's quiet felt different, not less safe, but more aware of its fragility. James had built walls around his life. She'd been climbing them without realizing there might be something on the other side she didn't yet understand. And now she wondered what would happen if those walls ever fell. Snow had begun to fall again in delicate threads, blurring the outlines of the world beyond Violet's windows. The blue house looked like it had been plucked from a painting, quiet and self-contained, the golden glow from the kitchen spilling onto the porch as dusk deepened. Violet stood at the counter slicing apples for a crumble. The scent of cinnamon lingered from the night before, and a soft jazz melody hummed from the speaker on the shelf. After Caleb's visit, she'd decided not to let shadows dictate her every thought. James had earned more trust than that. Still, the conversation played at the edges of her mind like a song she couldn't stop hearing. When James arrived, brushing snow from his coat, she welcomed him with a smile that was only slightly frayed at the edges. "Smells incredible in here," he said, stepping close to kiss her cheek. His hand lingered at her waist, a beat longer than usual, reassuring them that whatever was unsettled between them was still anchored by something real. They ate in the cozy warmth of the dining room, the snow outside thickening into a curtain. James told her about a new project launching at Walker Holdings, a philanthropic initiative for city schools. His eyes lit with the rare spark she'd seen when he spoke about things that mattered to him beyond the balance sheets. When they moved to the couch, her guard had softened again. He draped a blanket over her legs, his arm resting along the back of the sofa, fingers brushing her shoulder now and then as they talked about nothing and everything. Just after 9, the sound came, a sharp pop, not loud enough to be a gunshot, but distinct enough to make them both freeze. "What was that?" Violet asked, straightening. James was already on his feet. He moved to the front window and pulled the curtain back slightly. His jaw tightened. She followed, her breath catching, when she saw the driver's side mirror on James's car, hanging by a thread of wires, the casing shattered, glittering across the driveway like spilled diamonds. "Probably some kids were messing around," she said quickly, though she didn't believe it. James's voice was low. "No, that wasn't random." Before she could ask what he meant, he took out his phone, speaking into it with a clipped precision she'd never heard before. His tone left no space for argument. When he hung up, he turned to her. "My security team will be here in 10 minutes. They'll do a sweep." The word security landed heavily between them. "James, do you think this is because of me?" "No," he said instantly, his gaze firm. "This is about me, which means it's mine to handle." The next half hour unfolded in brisk, quiet movements. 2 men in dark coats arrived, checking the driveway, the perimeter, even the back garden where snow lay undisturbed. One spoke softly to James, then nodded toward Violet. James walked her to the kitchen, his hands gentle but his eyes intent. "They'll post someone outside tonight, just to be safe." She stared at him. "Is this normal for you?" "No," he said, and she believed him. But the hesitation before the word told her that while it wasn't routine, it wasn't impossible. James lingered by the door when the security team left, as if he could will the night into something less fractured. Violet stepped closer, her voice softer now. "You could have told me." He admitted, "I didn't want you to see this side of my life. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I don't get to choose that anymore. Do I?" Her chest tightened at the unspoken truth that she was part of his world now, whether or not she'd signed up for all the weight it carried. Later, they sat together in the living room. The snow outside now, a silent ocean. James's arm was around her, his thumb brushing absent circles against her arm. "When I was younger," he began quietly, "I thought the only way to be safe was to be untouchable, to ensure no one could hurt me, because no one could reach me. But then you—" He broke off, glancing down at her. "You make me want to let someone in, even if it means taking the risk." Violet's breath caught. "And you think I'm ready for that risk? I think you're stronger than you know," he said, kissing her temple. She wanted to tell him she wasn't afraid, not of him or whatever danger might be circling. But fear wasn't the whole truth. It wasn't the danger itself that frightened her. It was the thought of losing what they had barely begun to build. Long after James left that night, she lay in bed listening to the faint crunch of footsteps outside the security guard, pacing the perimeter. She thought about Caleb's warning, the shattering of glass in the snow, and the warmth in James's eyes when he spoke of the future. By morning, the snow had covered the broken mirror entirely, erasing the mark of the night before. But Violet knew better than to believe in erasures. The world James came from had brushed against hers now, and no amount of snowfall could make her forget the sound it made when it arrived. The morning after the broken mirror, Violet traced the rim of her coffee cup, watching the steam curl and vanish. The snow outside had turned to slush, softening the world's edges, but inside her head, everything felt sharper. James texted just after sunrise. "We are meeting all day. We'll stop by tonight if you're up for company." She'd replied with a simple, "Yes." It wasn't reluctance she wanted to see him, but she needed the hours to put her thoughts in order. The danger was no longer abstract. It had a sound, a shard, a glint in the snow. And yet she couldn't deny that in the moment James had stood at her side speaking to his team. In that steady, commanding tone, she'd felt something dangerously close to safe. When he arrived that evening, it was without the armor of his tailored coat and polished shoes. He wore a charcoal sweater, his hair a little mussed, the kind of look that suggested he'd had a long day and hadn't bothered to perfect the image. "You look tired," she said softly, as he stepped inside. "I am," he admitted, "but I wanted to be here more than anywhere else." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She gestured toward the sofa, and he sank into it with a sigh that seemed to come from deeper than his lungs. For a while they didn't speak. Violet brought him tea, and he held the cup without drinking, his gaze fixed on the fire crackling in the hearth. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked finally. His brow furrowed. "Regret what?" "The life you chose. The company. The battles that come with it." James's eyes stayed on the flames. "Sometimes. I built something I'm proud of, not because of the work, but because of what it costs. It's like a house with too many doors. You can close most of them, but there's always one you forget to lock, and sooner or later something gets in." Her fingers tightened around her cup. "And now I'm one of those doors." That made him look at her sharply. "No, you're not a weakness, Violet. You're—" He searched for the word, settling finally on a reason. She didn't answer immediately, letting the fire crackle fill the space between them. The way he said it, not as a compliment, but as a confession, did something to her chest she couldn't quite name. She said, "I've spent so long protecting myself from people's expectations of being used and left. And now you're asking me to open that door again, knowing what could walk through it." He said, "I'm not asking you to ignore the risk leaning forward. Please let me stand on the other side of it with you." The air between them shifted heavy with the kind of truth that couldn't be dressed in lighter words. She reached for his hand and he took it. His fingers cool at first, warming around hers. "Stay tonight," she said quietly. It wasn't a plea. It was an offering. James's thumb brushed against her knuckles, but he didn't move immediately. "If I do, I don't want to pretend it's just for comfort. I don't want to hold back anymore. I'm not asking you to." Later in the quiet folds of night, They found each other without rush or hesitation. His touch was deliberate, reverent, as though he memorized her in ways words could never hold. She felt the restraint in him, not the kind that kept them apart, but the kind that made every movement deliberate, every kiss a vow. There was a moment just before sleep when she opened her eyes to find him watching her. No smile, no smirk, just an unguarded gaze, soft and searching. What she whispered, "Just making sure you're real." She smiled faintly. "I'm here." In the following weeks, the nights James stayed over became less rare. Sometimes they cooked and didn't bother with more than a bottle of wine and a blanket. The security presence around the house remained, but the incident with the car mirror faded into the background, a memory that hummed quietly but didn't roar. Still, Violet noticed things. The way James checked his phone with a certain frown when he thought she wasn't looking. The late-night calls he took in the other room. The moments when his gaze went distant, like a man reading an invisible ledger of risks. One Saturday afternoon, she found him on the back porch, staring out at the bare trees, a half-drunk mug of coffee cooling in his hand. "Penny for your thoughts," she asked, sliding the door behind her. He shook his head lightly. "Not worth that much." She stepped closer, studying the set of his jaw. "You've been somewhere else all day." James glanced at her, then back at the trees. "There's a deal in play. I can't walk away from one without taking many good people down with me. It's messy. I don't want it touching you." Violet slipped her hand into his. "You don't have to give me the details. Just don't shut me out." He looked at her, then a flicker of relief crossing his face. "That's harder than you think. Keeping you close without letting the rest of it bleed through." She said softly that it may not be about keeping it from bleeding. "It is. It could be about letting me decide how much I can live with." The corner of his mouth lifted, but it wasn't quite a smile. "That's the problem, Violet. I'd rather carry it all than see it weigh on you." They stood there in the cool air until the coffee in his mug had gone completely cold. It was a small thing, but she felt something shift, not a wall falling, but a door opening just wide enough for her to glimpse the world beyond him. And though it was darker than she'd imagined, she didn't look away. The February wind was sharper than the calendar had promised. Violet pulled her coat tighter as she stepped out of the small market on Larchmont Avenue, the paper bag in her arms warm with fresh bread. She almost didn't notice the figure, leaning against the lamppost, until his voice cut through the hum of passing traffic. V. It had been years since anyone called her that. Caleb stepped forward, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn leather jacket. The same easy grin curved his mouth, but didn't reach his eyes. "What are you doing here?" she asked, shifting the bag in her arms as if it could shield her from the memory of him. "Waiting for you," he said. "I figured you wouldn't answer if I called." "You figured right." Caleb's grin faded. "We need to talk, and not here." Violet hesitated. The smart thing would be to walk away, but something in his tone, urgent, unpolished, kept her feet rooted. They ended up in the corner booth of a quiet cafe with fogged windows and chipped mugs. Caleb wrapped his hands around his coffee, as if to warm more than just his fingers. "It's about Walker," he said, leaning forward. "The man you've been seeing. The man you think you know." Violet's breath caught, but she kept her face still. "Careful, Caleb." He shook his head. "I'm not here to throw shade because I can't stand seeing you with someone else. This is bigger. His company is in the middle of something ugly, acquisitions that aren't clean people getting hurt. I know because I've been digging into it for months." She wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as the kind of half-truth Caleb was always good at spinning, but his eyes held none of the mischief she remembered. "You're saying James is behind something illegal. His name is on contracts that return to people you don't want to owe money to." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And if you're standing next to him when one of those doors gets kicked in, you'll be collateral." Violet stared at him, her heart pounding in an uneven rhythm. "Why tell me now?" Because I thought you were smart enough to keep your distance. Turns out I was wrong. The words stung, not because of the insult, but because of the truth they brushed against, that she had chosen James again and again, without fully asking what came with him. When she left the cafe, the bread under her arm felt heavy, as though it carried Caleb's warning in its weight. The walk home blurred in her mind, each streetlight haloed in the damp air. James was already at her kitchen counter when she came in. Sleeves rolled up, a bottle of wine breathing beside him. "You're late," he said with a smile that faltered as soon as he saw her face. "What happened?" Violet set the bread down and leaned against the counter, her fingers curling over the edge. "I saw Caleb today." James stilled. "And he also says your company is tangled up in things that could hurt people, and you're in deeper than you've told me." For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. "Caleb's not exactly a reliable source," James said finally, his voice measured. "He's made a career from being close enough to the truth to cause damage." "That's not an answer." James met her gaze. "Some of the companies I've acquired have skeletons. Some are in industries where power doesn't move without friction. That's not the same as being dirty." Violet's chest tightened. "Then tell me what is the same. Please tell me what's on those contracts with my ex showing up out of nowhere to warn me off you." James's jaw worked, but he didn't look away. "There's a deal right now with a logistics firm. On paper it's clean. Underneath, there are players involved I can't control. I'm trying to buy out their stake before it becomes worse. That's all I can say." "That's all you will say," she corrected softly. He exhaled, running a hand over his face. "Violet, there are lines I can't cross even for you. Not because I don't trust you, but because if those details leave my hands, I can't protect you from what follows." She looked at him for a long time, weighing the man in front of her against the man Caleb had warned her about. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the wear in his eyes, and knew he wasn't lying, but he wasn't giving her everything either. "I don't need you to tell me everything," she said finally, "but I need to know you're not the one holding the knife." James stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. "I'm not. And I will burn every bridge before I let you bleed for something I've built." It should have been enough. It almost was. But later, lying in bed while James showered, she replayed Caleb's voice, the certainty in it. She thought about doors again, the ones James had said were always left unlocked. When James slid into bed beside her, pulling her into the curve of his body, she let herself be held. But her eyes stayed open, tracing the faint cracks in the ceiling, wondering which truth would reach her first, his or Caleb's. The next morning, James was gone before she woke, leaving a note in his neat, decisive script. "Meeting in Boston. Back tomorrow." She stared at it for a long time, the edges of the paper pressing into her fingers. Outside, the slush had frozen overnight, turning the streets into glass. The kind you could see through if you looked closely enough, but also the kind that could shatter without warning. The event was supposed to be a celebration, the unveiling of Walker Innovation's newest philanthropic venture, a state-of-the-art community arts center in the city's heart. Violet had never seen the ballroom of the Whitfield Hotel so transformed. Tall glass vases held sprays of winter roses and eucalyptus. The air was laced with the scent of citrus and cedar, and under the glow of golden chandeliers, the city's most powerful moved like constellations in tailored suits and silk gowns. James had insisted she come, not as a guest he'd said, but as the woman who's kept me standing these past months. At first, it was almost easy to forget the tension of the past weeks. James's hand rested lightly on her back as they navigated the crowd, introducing her to CEOs, senators, and artists who smiled like they'd been waiting to meet her. His warmth was steady, his gaze never wandering far from her face. And for a while, she let herself believe that maybe the danger Caleb had warned her about was receding into shadow, until she saw him, Caleb, standing near the far wall, his expression sharp under the warm light. He wasn't dressed for the occasion. No tie, no practiced smile. And he was watching James like a man watching the tide before a storm. She excused herself from a conversation about sculpture funding and crossed to him, her heels whispering against the polished floor. "You shouldn't be here," she said under her breath. "Neither should he." Caleb shot back, nodding toward James. "I told you, Violet, this deal he's caught in, it's not just paperwork anymore. There are people here tonight who would rather see him ruined than have him walk away with their money." Before she could answer, a voice from behind her interrupted. "Is there a problem, James?" His tone was calm, but there was a steel thread in it. Caleb's eyes didn't leave James's. Not yet. "But there will be if you don't start playing this smarter." "This isn't your arena," James said evenly. "And Violet isn't your responsibility. She's more my responsibility than yours if you're walking her into the crosshairs," Caleb replied. Violet stepped between them, feeling the weight of both gazes on her. "Enough. I'm not a rope you can pull between you. Whatever's coming, I want the truth from both of you, and I like it now." James's jaw tightened. "The firm I'm negotiating with is here tonight. One of their partners doesn't believe in losing gracefully. There's a chance they'll try to use intimidation. But I'm close to shutting them out entirely." Caleb's voice cut in. "And until you do, she's exposed. One wrong step, and she's in the middle of a mess you can't talk your way out of." The music swelled in the background, a gentle jazz number that felt at odds with the sharpness in their words. Violet looked from one man to the other. In Caleb's eyes, she saw an unyielding need to protect herself from a threat he didn't trust James to neutralize. In James's, she saw the weight of a man who had been living with that threat for months, and who would rather bleed quietly than let her carry even a drop of it. "I can't live in half light," she said finally. "If I'm with you, James, it means I'm in the room when the doors open, even if I don't like what's on the other side." James's expression softened just slightly. "Then stay with me tonight. No shadows. No half-truths." They didn't get to say more before a commotion near the entrance drew the crowd's attention. Two men in dark suits spoke heatedly to security, their gestures, sharp eyes scanning the room. James's hand found Violet's, instantly pulling her a fraction closer. "That's them," he murmured. "Don't move from my side." She could feel his pulse through his grip, quick and controlled. The men's eyes landed on James, and in that instant Violet understood the truth of his earlier words. The stakes weren't metaphorical, and neither was the danger. One of the men approached, his smile thin. "Walker, I hear congratulations are in order, but I also listen to you've been making moves you'll regret. This isn't the place," James said evenly. "Oh, I think it is," the man replied, his gaze flicking to Violet. "Nice to see you branching out." Violet felt the implication in his tone, like a cold wind, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer to James, her voice steady. "If you have something to say it in the open, or walk away." The man's smile faltered enough for her to know she'd struck a nerve. He turned without another word, disappearing into the crowd with his partner. James exhaled, his shoulders loosening fractionally. "You didn't have to do that," he murmured. "Yes," she said, meeting his gaze. "I did." They stayed close for the rest of the night, their conversations with others punctuated by quiet, charged glances. Whatever battle was still ahead, Violet knew she'd made her choice in front of everyone, to stand where the light hit, even if the shadow reached for them. When they finally left, the winter air felt sharper, cleaner. James opened the car door for her, his hand lingering on hers before he closed it. "You changed something tonight," he said once they were on the road. "So did you," she replied. The city lights slid across his face, catching in his eyes. "Violet, whatever happens next, I don't want you to think I brought you into my life to make it harder. You've made it the only thing worth defending." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both defiance and faith. "Then defend it. Defend us." If you've been following Violet and James's story, you know moments like this are just the beginning of something bigger. I'd love to hear what you think about her choice tonight. Drop your thoughts below, and if you've been swept into their world, like I have, follow, like, and share so you don't miss what's coming next. The next chapter will change everything.